Welcome to Launchpad, the unique radio show and podcast that celebrates new book releases and the authors that created them. Now, let's take off with your host, Grace Sammon.
This is Launchpad. Welcome to episode 44 with Nancie Abuhaidar, Charlotte Dixon, Sharon Dukett, and Ann Goltz. I'm so excited to welcome these authors to the Launchpad studio today. They're going to be sharing about their newest books filled with exotic and lush landscapes, personal and professional battles, high-tech crimes, and fractured families. We're also going to be diving into the issues of greed, betrayal, virtue, science, and sentiment. On behalf of Mary Helen Sheriff, the author marketing coach, and myself, we're so excited to welcome these authors because on this episode, we are partnering with Lainey Cameron and her new program, and that is 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success. And each of these authors is a part of that 12-week launch package. So each of you, welcome to Launchpad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Grace.
We're so happy to have you here. So I want to jump right in, tell you the names of the books and the names of the authors, and then have them tell us a little bit more about their books. We have Nancie Abuhaidar with her book, The Trouble with Possibilities, Charlotte Dixon with The Matchmaker's Temptation, Sharon Dukett with The Shutdown List, and last but not least, Ann Goltz with Virtuous Women. Welcome to each of you, and let's just jump right in with Nancie Abuhaidar and The Trouble with Possibilities.
Hi, thank you again. So The Trouble with Possibilities is about a woman rediscovering herself, reinventing herself by volunteering in Africa. And what she finds is nothing is what she expected. She's a control freak, and she learns to let go of the control and maybe have a little faith that the mistakes she made in the past are not the same mistakes she's going to make in the future. So it's her journey and experiencing this landscape of set in Karatu, Tanzania, which is on the slopes of Ngorongoro crater. So the actual setting is a character as well.
Absolutely beautiful. And I was thrilled to read the blurb about your book because I too have been to that part of the world, and setting is so important. We'll be talking more about setting, Nancie and the other authors, as we go forward. Charlotte Dixon, you have written a novel, The Matchmaker's Temptation. Tell us about it.
Yes, thank you, Grace. And the setting in The Matchmaker's Temptation is important also, but it's not exotic like Africa. It's a small town romance. It's grumpy versus sunshine, enemies versus lovers romance. However, I do have to say that my books don't follow the strict romance. They're more like women's fiction with romantic elements. But The Matchmaker's Temptation is about Bridget Bourlieu, who is always very wedded to having control of things in her life. And things go just exactly as she wants them to until the day her husband walks out on her and steals the business that they built together. And so The Matchmaker's Temptation opens when she arrives in a very small town in the middle of Oregon wine country, desperate to rebuild her business and her life. And the only thing she has to do is find a wife on a deadline with a very handsome, carefree, devil-may-care Cade Calderwood. And so you can imagine what goes on from there.
So we have reinvention abounding already between
Yes,
the two
yes.
novels we have touched on. That's wonderful. Sharon Dukett, a new type of book for you, The Shutdown List. Tell us about it.
Okay, this is my book launching June 18th, so it's coming up very soon. And Shutdown List is a thriller. And I had a really good time writing this book. Because one of the things I enjoy is like cliffhanging chapter endings, and just keeping the activity going and keeping the momentum going and people guessing what's going on along the way. So I have a lot of that in this book. But basically, what the book is about is one woman who has recently lost her adult son, and she's filled with grief over that. And in the meantime, her marriage is collapsing with her husband because they don't speak to each other anymore. And he asks her to join him to go to a protest in Washington, D.C. And they do. She does. But then he gets off the train and says he'll meet her there later. And she continues on to meet up with her friend and ends up witnessing him leading this protest and then being dragged away by the police. And she's shocked, and because she had no idea that this was going to happen. And then he disappears. The police don't have him. They release him, and she doesn't know what happened to him. And then she is warned by someone that was with him earlier that day, who tells her that her life is in danger too, and she has to get out of there. So now she's tasked with having to find him and having to hide. She gets a phone call from her husband's phone that tells her, asks all kinds of questions, and doesn't give her any information. So she ditches her phone. She ditches everything electronic. She's going off the grid while she goes on the run, which is not an easy thing to do in today's world. So the book continues on from there. It really comes down to a ordinary woman who comes up against very powerful people who are corrupt and who have their own agenda. And this is what she has to deal with and overcome. That's my story.
Well, it sounds fascinating, and marriages are funny places, I think, sometimes, and we've certainly heard some of that. And Goltz, tell us about Virtuous Women, where marriage is also a focus.
Oh, definitely. Where's my camera? There it is. Virtuous Women. It was released this past March. This is my debut. It is a fictional story that takes place in the real world environment of Christian patriarchy, particularly the Quiverful movement, which at its basest form is the belief that you leave the number of children you have open to God. No birth control whatsoever, just you have as many kids as God wants you to have. So my main character, Hope, is the eldest daughter in a Quiverful family. Since her mother's death 2 years earlier, she has been raising and homeschooling her 10 younger siblings and keeping her father's house. This is the only life she's ever known. It's the only life she can look forward to knowing. Her only hope for escape is to eventually enter into a courtship with a godly young man of her father's choosing so that she can eventually become a helpmeet in her own right. That's until Jennifer Levine comes to visit their very insular church. Jennifer is a worldly woman, meaning she was raised outside of this belief system, just in regular secular American culture. And she has very romantic ideas of what traditional family values are like. And she's read a lot of historical novels, and she wants her life to look like that. So she's at this church basically looking for a husband. And she finds one in Hope's widowed father, Michael. And so they get married, and this is great for Hope because she is able to enter into a courtship. And much to her surprise, her betrothed is secretly very progressive and has ideas for their life that are outside the bounds of what she's always known, with a lot more freedom, a lot more control, a lot fewer kids. And she wants that life more than she's ever wanted anything else. For the first time, she can imagine something different from what her father's planned for her. Unfortunately for Jennifer, her dreams of traditional family values don't live up to the real life nightmare of patriarchy. And her marriage is not going well. And as things get better for Hope, they get worse for Jennifer until Jennifer does the unthinkable and rejects her husband's authority over her. And this launches the family into a major crisis that threatens Hope's future.
So anybody who's interested in anything going on with families needs to be reading each of your books because we're so family dense here. And there's so much stories about redemption as well at different levels. Let's go with that idea of redemption. And Nancie, let's start with you.
Well, yeah, my character Dell has a huge redemptive arc. In the beginning, she's very controlling because she views that her first impulse was when she was in college. She met a man and she got married and had kids and sort of changed the whole focus of her life. And it didn't go that well. I mean, he wasn't abusive, but he was controlling. And she wasn't happy in the marriage. She wanted out for years and years and years, and it sort of caused this rift between her and her kids. So when she goes to Africa, she's just literally pulled the plug on her husband who was shot in the line of duty. So her son is totally rejected her. Her daughter's sort of a loose cannon, but she decides she's going to go and just reinvent herself and become the woman she really wants to be. So she wants to redeem herself in her own eyes. And she actually meets a man. So the temptation is, am I making the same mistake again? Because I really like this guy. And she has a lot of conflict that way, but she makes a lot of friends and she discovers how to balance those two warring issues in her.
I frequently have picked the wrong man. Luckily, I'm with the right one now, but I can identify. I can identify with that one. Charlotte, talk about redemptive strains in your book because you
I,
have
I,
that marriage that splits
I
up right there.
do. I do. And I think for Bridget in my book, her redemption is transformational. She doesn't even know that she needs redeeming. This is the one of the characters quotes the John Lennon song, "Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans." That's really Bridget. This life happens to her when she's just making plans to, she's got a tight grip on everything and she just knows how she's going to make this happen. But none of that comes true. But it turns out that this is what she needed all along. And I just love stories of female transformation, and I love the sound of everybody's stories here because there's an element of that in all of us, and I think it's so impactful for readers to read about fictional characters that are finding themselves and finding their true selves. Even though it's fiction, I think it helps every reader know that they can change their lives if they need to.
Oh, I would agree with that. Sharon, you talk a lot about the perfect storm in your book of these elements coming together. Is there also a redemptive arc in your book as well?
There is. We start out meeting Anita when she's just carried away with grief and has kind of been ignoring what's going on in the world. And she's suddenly thrown into this situation where she can't ignore what's happening anymore. And ends up with her having to make some serious decisions about how she's going to what are her priorities and how she's going to handle things. Um, you know, is she going to be able to rescue her husband and other things of that nature? There's also, my book has a layer of a lot about relationships between parents and their adult children. There are three situations like that where there's a parent and their adult child that is featured in the book, and that relationship takes very different forms with each of them, depending on what's going on with the parent, depending on what's going on with the child. And in certain cases, it is the child that has to experience redemption and may experience it in odd ways that don't necessarily look like traditional redemption, but at the same time, they are.
You're challenging us on that one for sure. And let's stay with this topic of redemption because yours is the most perhaps theologically based, which is where we frequently think about being redemptive. But I talk about the characters in general and your redemptive arcs.
Yeah, that's actually kind of funny because while the world of my book is steeped in a very narrow sect of Christianity, there's a lot less about redemption and more about salvation and identity. Um, One thing I was very careful to do was Michael, Hope's father and Jennifer's husband, is the patriarch of the family. And I was very careful to not make him be, in his own right, a toxic individual. He is a patriarch. He has fully embraced this lifestyle. And he's done it because he wants, I guess, the redemption of his family. He wants their salvation. And he believes the only way that they are going to be saved is by following this path that it is his responsibility to set for them. Um, for Hope, it's less about redemption and more about discovering who she actually is. She spent her entire life being told who she is and what she's got to do and who she's going to be and what her role is. And through the book, you see her, realizing who she's been told to be isn't who she is. And so she's got to figure out who is she and then what is she going to do about that, because she's not been given the tools to live outside this environment. Jennifer, by contrast, believes, thinks she knows who she wants to be. She's lived in the world and doesn't want the world. She wants this until she has it and sees what it really is. And then she's also got to basically grow up, and figure out, okay, the dreams of childhood of the traditional family, that's not what I thought it was. Now what?
Each of these are on now my TBR list, which is ever growing to have that beautiful to be read list. I'd like to switch things up a little bit now. You have all found yourselves working with the fabulous Lainey Cameron in 12 weeks to book launch success. And people, our listeners, can learn more about that at laineycameron.com. But the bookish journey is one that I find absolutely fascinating. I have 7 books. They're all very, very different, and the journey around each of them is very different. I want to start with Sharon. Talk a little bit about this idea of the work behind the book to get that book out into the world.
Okay, well, this is my second book. My first book was a memoir, which of course is totally different. And I was privileged to speak with Grace about that book a couple of years ago. So this is my second time getting to talk with her. But this book is a thriller, and it took a very different direction, obviously, for my memoir. Although one of the reasons I embarked on a memoir is that I got some comments, some reviews that described my book as a thrill ride and a page turner. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm good at this, and this is what I should be writing. So, but it was important to me to write about something that I cared about enough. And so this book is around climate action and the narrative of what people, what's out there in the world about climate and the debates around it and so forth, and how that narrative gets out in the world. And I wanted to have people see what that, what the possibilities are of what might be going on behind the scenes and make people think about that. One of my experiences that's been pretty odd with this book is that I have over and over and over again had scenes from my book appear in the news, like all the time. My opening scene takes place at a protest on the steps of of the Capitol building in Washington, and I wrote that scene well before January 6th. And so when that happened, my first thought was, oh my goodness, do I now need to rewrite this scene? Because the scene was supposed to be something that, gave people sort of sympathy towards these characters. And now maybe people aren't going to be sympathetic towards these characters. But I did change up a little bit of it, so to make it different. But
So we
aside
have
from that,
so we have different processes and different types of book, memoir and thriller. Nancie,
yeah.
tell us about your journey to getting your book, The Trouble with Possibilities, out the door.
Well, yeah, that's been a long one. Um, it started actually with a story my sister came up with. She loved the plot. Well, she came up with the plot. She hired a ghostwriter to write it, which I kind of, as a sister, went, "Are you kidding me?" So she gave it to me, and I liked the premise of the story. Mainly, she thought I wanted to be a fantasy writer, but I just love to write stories. I don't care. So I started this and rewrote the whole thing, came up with a different plot, kept sort of the characters and the setting. The setting changed because I'd never been to Tanzania. So I wrote this whole book and I loved the story, loved the characters. And then I went to Tanzania and went, oh no, now I have to rewrite the whole thing again. So, and now it's sort of after draft and draft. It's sort of a story from my heart and my sister's heart, and it means a lot. I have other manuscripts, so I've written other things, but this has to be the first one. So this has to be the debut.
Well, hopefully there'll be many more behind it.
Hopefully.
And let's switch to you. What is your journey to getting your book, Virtuous Women, out the door?
Um, First of all, I first started thinking about this book in 2011 and first put pen to paper. Uh, and yes, it did start out longhand in 2012. Um, at first, I was trying to go with traditional publishing, but I was running into a real genre problem because it's steeped in a Christian environment, but it is absolutely not Christian fiction. So, from a marketing perspective, um, the religious aspect might turn off secular readers, but Christians looking for a feel good Christian fiction novel are going to be very disappointed and probably angry. Also, the main character starts off as 17 years old, but it's not YA. I'll also say this book spans a decade and a half, so she's in her 30s by the time it ends. Um, but what surprised me the most, and I'd heard it, but I didn't really believe it, writing the book is the easy part. Publishing it and then marketing it, that's a whole other ball game. And Lainey's course, it was wonderful. In some ways, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose. Um, but all the materials that she gave are still available and will continue to be available, even though I finished the course months ago. So I'm able to go back and, oh, okay, that part didn't really make sense to me back then, but now that I'm in the midst of it, okay, this is helpful to me now. So that's been really, really helpful. And it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint.
It is a very, very different journey to get our books out the door, and I would agree with you. It's the hard part is all the things we didn't know about, maybe, and making sure we budget for those events that we have to get into our calendars, our social medias, etc. Charlotte Rains, with your book, Charlotte Rains Dixon, with your book, The Matchmaker's Temptation, what was your story to get it out the door?
Well, this is my fourth book. I have three books published. Two are novels and one is a novella. The first one was actually published by a traditional, albeit very small, publisher way back in 2013. And that was a bit of a surprise how much the publisher did not help with marketing was the surprise, and how much marketing I had to do, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know Lainey then. I wish I had. And then I self-published my novel, The Bonchance Bakery, in what year is it? 2022. Sorry, the years kind of time gets confusing. Um, and I realized after that, and then I published the novella. It's a Christmas novella, so that was sort of a just a gimme. I realized how much I didn't know after self-publishing. I mean, I thought I did a lot, and I just didn't. So when I finished The Matchmaker's Temptation, and I was determined to self-publish it because I've had some experiences with agents and traditional publishing, and I just thought self-publishing is the way to go. After when The Matchmaker's Temptation was ready, I thought I've got to learn how to do this, and I found out about Lainey's course and met Anne and Nancie there, and it's just I can't recommend it highly enough. As Anne described it, there's so much information. I feel like I've got to go back through and constantly dig through it. So it's highly recommended.
And I think you also, Charlotte, hit on something that I think is critical to authors is building community. You just mentioned how you met these other people.
Mhm.
And I think that that's such an important part of each of our bookish journeys. One of my favorite questions to ask authors is, what did your characters teach you? And so I'm going to start with Nancie. What did your characters teach you? You've rewritten your book and you are now a changed person because of meeting them and embracing them. So, what did they teach you?
To be honest with myself and just sort of delve into the hard parts, like delve into the emotions that are uncomfortable, because that's where you do the most healing. That's where the story is. That's where all the magic sort of happens. And she taught me not to take myself too seriously, honestly.
Those are pretty important life lessons. Anne,
Um, what did they teach me? They taught me the importance of really thinking about the consequences of my actions, the choices that I make, particularly within my family. I have a husband and two teenagers. The decisions I make ripple through them, and other people sometimes live with the consequences of my decisions. Um, that being said, I also need to be very careful to understand who I am and not try to be something that I'm not for someone else's sake. So, those are probably the two biggest lessons, being true to myself, but also recognizing that my choices have consequences for other people.
important life lessons. Sharon, you've written memoir and now a thriller. The Shutdown List. What did the characters in the Shutdown List teach you?
Well, the character in the shutdown list is a woman who is 55 years old, and so she has lived a life. I wanted my main protagonist to be a woman with some years behind her, because I feel like too many books all focus on young women and and older women just sort of disappear from the pages as any kind of hero. So one of the things that she taught me was that there's no age limit to what you can do and what kind of hero you can be and how much impact you can have on the world um, when you need to do that. And you have a lot more capability than you may think you do.
Oh, wonderful. Charlotte, last question for you as well.
My character Bridget taught me not to grasp on to things so tightly and to be open to the miracles that are all around us. Life is the miracle.
I have to tell you, I was so excited to talk with each of you, both about the business and the themes in each of your books. I've learned so much from you. It sounds like you also learned a great deal from Lainey Cameron and her course, The 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success. I want to thank each of you for being on the show. I'm going to ask you just, do you have one closing word about your book? What would you like somebody to know? Anne, let's start with you.
It's available for sale now on Amazon and bookshop.org and goltz.com.
Fabulous. Nancie?
That I'm hoping to release by the end of the summer. And this has been a journey that will change me forever. And I cannot, Anne was right. Lainey's course was like drinking from a fire hose, and I'm still processing everything and I'm using it. And I just can't wait to put this book out into the world.
Sharon, closing words?
Well, I didn't mention Lainey when you asked before, but my first book, I used a publicist, and I have to tell you that I learned far more from Lainey and than I ever would have learned from a publicist, and accomplished, I feel, a lot more as a result of that. It was very helpful having her on this ride with me in launching this book. And I also want to say that my book is available June 18th, and that it is a thriller, but it also has a very different layer of depth that has to do with emotions. So I think of it as an emotional thriller. It's an emotional conspiracy thriller.
All right. Charlotte,
Love that.
last words.
My book will be out late summer, like Nancie, and I'm really looking forward to getting this story out into the world. It's the first of a series that will be set in this small town in Oregon wine country, and I can't wait to have all the books out there for everybody to read them.
Well, I can't wait for all of them as well. We had Nancie Abuhaidar with The Trouble with Possibilities, Charlotte Rains Dixon with The Matchmaker's Temptation, Sharon Dukett with The Shutdown List, and Ann Goltz with Virtuous Women. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Launchpad.
Thank you.
This episode is copyrighted by Grace Sammon and Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thank you for visiting with us on Launchpad.